Shalom Aleichem. Look at the Sicha, volume 25, Sicha number 1 for Breishis. This is a Rashi Sicha, right at the beginning of the Torah, chapter 1, verse 4. The verse says, Hashem saw the light is good, and he separated between light and the darkness, says Rashi, on the words that he quotes from the verse. Hashem saw the light is good, and he separated, says Rashi. For this too, we need medrash. Incidentally, what do you mean for this too? Because on verse 1, Rashi already had to come on to the use of a medrash, which is breaking from his typical style, which is always to teach things in a way of pishat, in a literal level. However, there are cases where Rashi says, we need medrash. This verse cannot be understood otherwise. We have an example of that in verse 1. And we have an example again in verse 4. This too, we need medrash. Af anu tzrichim ledivrei Agada. We need here too, to understand this verse, we need medrash. Because otherwise, what does the verse mean? And Rashi brings the medrash. What does the verse mean? He saw the light is good and he separated between the light and the darkness. He saw that it's not appropriate for sinners to use this light. So we set it aside for the righteous in the future. It's a midrashic interpretation. It's not the simple interpretation. Simple interpretation is he separated between light and the darkness. However, the Medrash tells us that there's a whole other story going on here. This was really a much greater light. This is not the daylight that you and I see that was created on day 4. This is some powerful light that, you can see from one side of the world to the other. It's also Ruach HaKodesh, spiritual light, whatever it might be. It's tremendous, tremendous light on a whole different level. And that light was created on day 1. That's the light of day 1. And it was hidden away for the righteous because the sinners don't deserve to use it. It'll be there for the time of Mashiach. Okay. And then Rashi continues, but if you want, you can also say on a literal interpretation. He saw that it's good. It's not nice to serve, that the light should serve mixed together with darkness. So he said it separate times, by day and by night, respectively. The light will be by day, and the darkness will be by night. So the Rebbe is bothered by this. Rashi. Why does Rashi need a midrashic interpretation, which is against his stated goal, that he tries to teach everything on a simple literal level? That's Rashi's purpose in this commentary, to show that the meanings of the verse, the straightforward literal meaning, is actually spelled out in the verse, and you don't have to come on to midrashic interpretations, which are allegory and which are spiritual, which are absolutely true, etc. But it's a different column of Torah study. This is Rashi's thing is pshat. Why would he run to a midrashic interpretation, which is breaking from his stated goal, and go to a literal, and when he can go to a literal one? He has a literal interpretation. He brings it. We know the rule when Rashi brings 2 interpretations because neither one is satisfactory. So therefore he brings 2 because together it's going to work. We also know when Rashi brings 2, typically the first one is much more satisfactory, but it's not 100% satisfactory. So he brings the second one to perfect it. Why would you bring a midrashic interpretation when you have a literal one? And if for whatever reason you find that neither one is completely satisfactory, at least bring the literal one first. So that's the Rebbe's question. Let's analyze, let's quickly again reread the 2 interpretations. The first one is midrashic. It's very spiritual. It's like way out of the box. That the light was good, so he separated it aside for the future. We shouldn't have access to it today with the sinners. And the second one is a straightforward reading. He separated light and darkness. One is going to be by day, one is by night. Why would you bring the first interpretation from the Medrash? Stick to the literal. And if you need both, at least the literal should go first. I want to approach this Sicha by using the most fundamental question that we need when we are studying Rashi, and this is the title of a very good book on Rashi. What's bothering Rashi? To begin with, every time you learn a Rashi, something is bothering Rashi. He doesn't usually make it in a way of a question and an answer, but his entry is such that without his entry, there's a problem, and there's a problem that's literal. Just by reading the text, you can't get past it. It doesn't make sense, so to speak, and you need Rashi. Something's bothering him. What's really bothering Rashi? This is not spelled out in the Sicha as a question, but I think ultimately this is really the question that the Rebbe is asking. What's bothering Rashi? The text says Hashem saw the light is good and he separated between light and darkness. Goodbye, it's all good. In fact, the next verse says that he put the light is by night, the light is by day, the darkness is by night. Goodbye. Why do you even need any Rashi, let alone a midrashic Rashi and two interpretations? So, what's bothering Rashi? Says the Rebbe, let's look at the Mefarshei Rashi, the commentaries on Rashi, the classic commentaries. There's the Mizrahi, there's the Guragi, Barbanelli quotes. And they say that what's bothering Rashi is that the verse doesn't make sense. That's when Rashi gives an entry, when the verse doesn't make sense on the literal level. What doesn't make sense about the verse? How could you say that you separated between light and darkness? Separation can only be done with two things that can mix. Light and darkness can't mix, because if light is mixed with darkness, it's not light, and darkness is not darkness. You know, on day 2, God separated between the waters and the dry land. You can mix it up. You could have the waters all around the dry land. To separate it means no, there's going to be water here and dry land here. That makes sense. But how can you separate? How could the Torah say by Yavdel Elokim that God separated the light from the darkness? Light and darkness are by definition separated, because they're opposites. That's what's bothering Rashi according to the commentaries. Mefarshei Rashi, the commentaries on Rashi. Separation doesn't apply with light and darkness. They can't mix. That's a problem. And therefore, says Rashi as his first answer, for this we need medrash. We can't interpret this verse to mean separation in the simple sense that he separated two things from one another, because they never mix, they're never together. Light and darkness can't be together. Find them together. It's impossible. And therefore, it can't mean literally what it seems to say, that Hashem separated the light from the darkness. That doesn't make any sense. But rather, it's a midrashic interpretation. Separation here doesn't mean to separate two things, but to set aside the light. By Yavdil, he separated, meaning he set aside the light for the future. But why does he bring a second? And that makes sense. He didn't separate light from darkness. You can't do that. He set aside the light. As the Medrash teaches us, that the light was so special and only the righteous had it. For the future, what have you. However, you still need a second interpretation. Because at the end of the day, the Torah does say by Yavdel Elokim that God separated between the light and the darkness. In the first interpretation, first of all, it doesn't really mean separate, it means set aside. So that's not so perfect. And secondly, in the first interpretation, you're not separating between light and darkness. You're just separating out the light. So there's problems with that first interpretation. However, the second interpretation gives you a literal approach that he does separate the light from the darkness, but not that he's separating out light from darkness, because you can't do that. They never mix. But rather, he doesn't separate them out in space. They can never be in the same space. He separates them out in time. He makes an allotment of time for light by day and for darkness at night. So it works on some level. However, it's understood that the midrashic interpretation has a benefit, because midrashic interpretation explains quite plainly that you're not talking about separating light from darkness, which you can't do, but rather it means setting aside. So there's a plus and minus in each. If you go through the Sicha carefully, you see the benefit of midrashic interpretation, that separate doesn't actually mean separate, but it means to set aside. Why is that a benefit? It's not the literal meaning. It's a benefit because to say the literal meaning that you're separating light from darkness makes no sense. You can't. They'll never mix. But the benefit of the literal interpretation is that separate actually does mean separate. You separate light from darkness, albeit not in space, because that's impossible, but in time allotment. So there's a benefit in the literal interpretation that by Yavdel Elokim, God separated between light and the darkness in some fashion in terms of their time allotment. It means what it says. Even though that's kind of strange, because you didn't really separate the light from the darkness, you just gave them a separate time. And that's why the first and main interpretation requires midrashic interpretation. That separate doesn't mean to separate, but it means to set aside. And this solves the main objection the main problem that Rashi had, according to the commentaries, namely that the verse doesn't make any sense. You can't separate light from darkness. It doesn't mean that you separate light from darkness. It means you set it aside. So this is how the commentaries of Rashi deal with this Rashi. And this is how they make sense of the fact that Rashi requires two interpretations. He doesn't suffice with the literal. He also adds a midrashic. And not only that, the midrashic is first. Says the Rebbe, if that's the case, the Rebbe is not satisfied with the commentaries, with the approach of the Mefarshei Rashi, of the commentaries of Rashi, because at the bottom line, at the end of the day, there is an approach that's literal. Rashi should have just gone with that one. Or if he felt a need, he could have added the midrashic as a second one. Why would you bring a midrashic interpretation, not only bring it, but bring it as the first, when there exists a literal interpretation? I know it's not perfect, because in the literal interpretation, the separation between light and darkness is not in space, but rather in time allotment. But at least the verse can make sense on a literal level. Hashem saw the light is good. He separated between light and darkness. He gave each one a lot of time. And if you think it's not perfect, so you add a midrashic interpretation, something to do with separating out light. But why would you have a need to bring the midrashic interpretation at all, perhaps, and bring it first, when it doesn't really explain Vayavdel, separation as separation at all? And it also doesn't flow with the rest of the verse, that he separated between light and darkness. According to the first interpretation, he just separated the light aside. So the Rebbe is not satisfied with the approach of the commentaries on Rashi. This can't be what's bothering Rashi. To me, this is the tool of understanding this Sicha, because the Rebbe is going to bring three approaches. One from the commentaries, then the Rebbe suggests one, and then the Rebbe concludes with another one. And the approach is always what's bothering Rashi. The Rebbe says, we cannot accept, I don't accept, says the Rebbe, that what's bothering Rashi here is this issue that separation can't apply between light and darkness. It could. Maybe not in time, not in space, but in time. And for that's not a reason for Rashi to go run to a medrash. And the Rebbe is going to prove that he's right conclusively. Not just that the argument is very powerful. Why would you run to a medrash when you have a literal way of explaining the separation, albeit in time, not in space? But the Rebbe is going to prove it conclusively. And this is that if you look at Rashi's heading, the Rebbe maintains in all the Rashi Sichos, and many of the Rashi Sichos, that the Dibur HaMaskal, the opening words with which Rashi begins his entry, which are a quote from the verse, is precise. He quotes precisely those words in the verse upon which his comment is coming. And those words indicate what's bothering him. Those words indicate why he even made an entry to begin with. Take a look at the Dibur HaMaskal of Rashi, Rashi's heading. Rashi's heading is, Hashem saw the light is good and he separated. In Hebrew, Vayar Elokim et ha'or ki tov vayavdel. This, if the commentaries of Rashi are right, that what's bothering Rashi was, how could you separate light from darkness? Rashi should have said the rest of the verse. He separated light from darkness. In fact, he shouldn't have even said the beginning of the verse, Hashem saw the light is good. That's not what Rashi is explaining. According to the Mefarshim, the commentaries on Rashi, what's bothering Rashi is, how could you separate light from darkness? They're never mixed. So the header should have been, he separated light from darkness. You don't need the first half of the Rashi. He saw light is good. And you do need the rest of the verse. Light from darkness, or at least, etc. No, he doesn't do that. He quotes the whole beginning of the verse, Hashem saw light is good, and he separated. And no etc. even. So what's bothering Rashi has nothing to do with the light and darkness having an issue of separation. The Rebbe just proved conclusively from the header of Rashi that the way the commentaries of Rashi approach it can't really be his ultimate meaning. But rather, it has everything to do with the part of the verse that Rashi does quote, something about seeing the light is good and he separated. So, the Rebbe continues, and so we're back to our question. Why include midrashic interpretation and as the first primary interpretation? Or the question again, what's bothering Rashi? Every time you learn a Rashi Sicha, it's extraordinary because the precision is perfect. The Rebbe logically doesn't understand the way the other commentaries look at it. Why would you not put the literal interpretation first, or only? But he also proves, because the opening header, as we said, clearly indicates that it is not about the problem of separating light from darkness. Otherwise, Rashi would have quoted it in his header. So what is it about? Aha! Look at the header of Rashi. Hashem saw the light is good and he separated. So what the Rebbe is saying, this is going to be the Rebbe's first approach. What did he see that made him separate? It doesn't just say that God made light, and then he separated light from darkness. There's an introduction. He saw that the light is good, and he separated. He saw something over here that compelled him to say, I got to separate this light out. That's what's bothering Rashi. It's a whole different thing. Rashi's not so bothered by the fact that how could you separate light from darkness? They don't mix. They don't mix. They don't mix in space. They mix in time. If randomly every 5 minutes they become light and dark, that'll be a mix. And instead, they're separated. That's not what's bothering Rashi. What's bothering Rashi is something else entirely. What did Hashem see about this light that made him decide to separate it? So here he gives two interpretations, you see. Let's start with the literal one. Well, the light is good. Light is special. Light is special. It's not nice that light should serve at the same time as darkness. Or random. They wouldn't have their set time. Let's assume if there wouldn't be the concept of day and night, there'll be different times when it's light and dark, interchangeable. It's not nice. Because light is good. So it's not nice that darkness and light should mix interchangeably. So Hashem separated. That could work. It's a pshat level interpretation. It's a literal interpretation. You're separating, you're making boundaries. A time for this and a time for that. And the reason is because he saw light is good. But it's not such a compelling reason. Because light is good, he can't work with darkness. I mean, it's not terrible. It's not really terrible because they're not really working at the same time anyway. They're just a question of that they don't have their own appointed time. So it's not so terrible, it's just not nice. Look at the language that Rashi brings in the literal level. He saw that light is good, so he said it's not nice for it to serve mixed with darkness. Not nice is a very benign word. It's not terrible. Because first of all, they'll never be at the same time because they can't be. And all right, so they work in random. It's just not nice. It's the chain. But if the verse says a compelling thing, Hashem saw the light is good and he separated, there's a much stronger way, a much more compelling interpretation. If you go to the Medrash, and that is, he saw the light is good. There's something special about this light and it's not appropriate for sinners. This is based on the language of the Rashi. In the Midrashic interpretation, he says it's not appropriate. Einai kedai. Sinners don't deserve this. It can't be. It's a problem. That's a strong statement. Hashem sees light is good. He says, separate it. It makes sense that he saw something that compelled him into action. Because if he left it as is, it's not appropriate. Einai kedai. It's no good. Because this is a midrashic interpretation, Rashi also brings down a literal interpretation. He saw that it's good. Light is good, darkness not so much. It's not nice that they should mix. But not nice is not so compelling. So it's not nice. Why is that a reason to make a big deal out of it? Not nice, no. Not appropriate is much stronger. And therefore the Medrash becomes the first interpretation, and Rashi and the literal becomes the second. So what's bothering Rashi is, what did he see that made him separated? Because that's what the verse says. Hashem saw the light is good and he separated. He first brings a medrash, and the medrash is that he saw that it's not appropriate for sinners, so he set it aside for the righteous. What's the benefit of the midrashic approach? He saw something inappropriate, not merely not nice. Einoi kedai, it just can't be. It's not okay. It's not okay. That's strong. So even though it's a medrash, we have no choice. We need the medrash. We're compelled to go to the medrash because we want to find something really problematic with the fact that we don't separate it out because it's not okay. It's not appropriate. However, we also like the literal, and there's a benefit to the literal. The literal is, what's the benefit of the literal, even though it's not as compelling? Because if you didn't separate the times of light and darkness, it's not a problem that's inappropriate, but it's just not nice. So it's not as compelling. However, on the other side of it, the literal interpretation has a benefit. That separate means separate. The midrashic interpretation, separate means set aside. It doesn't mean separate. That's not the literal meaning of the word vayavdel. Plus, it doesn't flow with the rest of the verse. Vayavdel Elokim, God separated between light and darkness. According to the midrashic interpretation, the separation wasn't between light and darkness. It was a separation of light, putting it aside. And for these two reasons, Rashi feels a need to also bring the literal interpretation. But he brings the midrashic interpretation first because it's much more compelling. It's much more compelling with what? With the verse, Hashem saw the light is good. He saw something good that is so compelling that he's got to do something. It's inappropriate if we leave it. And for that, the medrash is much stronger. And the Rebbe, based on this, says the Rebbe, this approach, it works well. It's a very logical approach, but again, the Rebbe teaches everything is written in Rashi. First of all, it works well with Rashi's header, the Dibur HaMaschal. As we said earlier, the Dibur HaMaschal is not, he separated between light and darkness, which would mean that there's some kind of problem understanding the separation. How can you do that? He didn't say that at all. He didn't even say an etc. But rather, Rashi's header is, Hashem saw light is good and he separated. We're trying to understand what did he see, which created this act of separation, not even an etc. So we're not so focused on what separation between light and darkness, just the separation, so to speak, on its own. He saw something special about the light, and it's not okay for it to be here because of the sinners, so he moved it aside. So it makes sense. And this approach of the Rebbe also works very well with the diyukim, with the precise wording in Rashi, that in the midrashic interpretation, Rashi says, not appropriate. Einoi kedai. It's not appropriate for sinners. Whereas in the literal interpretation, Rashi says, Einoi noah, loi noah. It's not nice. It's a whole different language. You could have used the same language. He changes the language. Because the midrashic interpretation therefore becomes much more compelling, even though it's midrashic and Rashi doesn't like to run to medrash. He likes pshat, but here he has sort of no choice. He's compelled to go to medrash because the midrashic interpretation is much stronger. It's not appropriate to keep this here. We got to separate it out. Whereas in the literal, it's just not nice. So the Rebbe's approach is like spelled out right in the Rashi. Very, very strong. However, the Rebbe now is going to veto his own interpretation. He's going to object to his own interpretation, and the Rebbe is going to say, at the end of the day, I get it. I understand the weakness of the literal interpretation, as we said. However, it's still better, and Rashi should have chosen it alone, or at least at a minimum made it the first commentary, because on a pshat level, it makes more sense. Because number one, this whole act of separation is contained in the text. The midrashic interpretation's story about separation, that he separated out for the sinners, is not contained in text at all. You only know about it from the medrash. Whereas the literal interpretation of separation is contained in the text. First of all, it's a separation. It's not a separating out. And second of all, it's a separation between light and darkness, setting a time for each. And if your job, Rashi, is to explain literal, that which is contained in its literal text is much more compelling approach. So therefore, why would Rashi opt for the midrashic interpretation at all? And not only that, but make it first, if there's a literal interpretation. I understand the benefits of the midrashic interpretation. I understand the limitations of the literal one. As we said earlier, however, they're not strong enough to compel the Rebbe, for the Rebbe to accept that that's the reason Rashi was compelled to do it. No. Rashi is so biased, so to speak, towards Pshat. He so tries to stay true to the literal whenever possible that in this case he would have stayed with the literal. Even though what he saw is that light is good and it's not nice for it to be with darkness, that's enough. It's not such a compelling thing, but it's good enough because it fits better with the literal meaning for two reasons, A and B. At the bottom of the screen, A, because this whole separation act is spelled out in text. He separated it out, the light and the darkness, each one its own time. Whereas the midrashic separation that it has to do with hiding the light for the future is only in midrashic. It doesn't say it in the text at all. And B, that according to the literal approach, the rest of the verse makes much more sense. He separated between light and the darkness. That's exactly what it means. You made a time for light and darkness by day and night. Whereas according to midrashic interpretation, the rest of the verse doesn't flow. How are you going to read the verse? The light is so good that it's not appropriate for sinners, so vayavdil, he separated it aside for the future. Oops, what do you do with the rest of the verse? Between the light and the darkness. We'll figure it out. It doesn't flow. So for all these reasons, says the Rebbe, if Rashi's objection is this thing with what Hashem saw, he should have still opted for literal interpretation alone, or certainly as the main one. So we're back to the question. Says the Rebbe, this becomes the Rebbe's final interpretation. Let's understand why he opted for a midrashic interpretation, and even as the primary one, by asking the question, what's bothering Rashi? And says the Rebbe, what's bothering Rashi is something else. The Rebbe already changed. This is the third approach of what's bothering Rashi. First approach is what was bothering Rashi. How could you separate between light and darkness? They're not mixable. But the Rebbe vetoed it. And one of the main reasons he vetoed it, because Rashi in his header doesn't bring in the idea of separation between light and darkness. He cuts out the rest of the verse. In the second one, Rashi, the Rebbe approaches that what's bothering Rashi is, what did he see that made him make the separation? So he has to have something compelling. And therefore he opted for the midrashic thing that has to do with the sinners, because it's very compelling. It's not appropriate. But the Rebbe says that too is not going to work, as we said before. Here comes the Rebbe's final approach. What's bothering Rashi is something different. There's an extra word in the verse. It says, "Vayar Elokim es ha'or ki tov." Hashem saw the light, that it's good. Why does it have to say the light? It should just say, Hashem saw that it's good. He just created the light one verse before. Vayomer Elokim, the Lord said, let there be light, and there was light. What should be the next verse? And the Lord saw it's good. And that's the way it is, by the way, in all the other days of creation. At the end of every day of creation, Hashem finished the project, and it says, and he saw it's good. It doesn't say what that it is, because he doesn't have to. We just finished creating it. Take a look in the Chumash. This is true in every day of creation. When it says, Vayar Elokim ki tov, Hashem saw it is good. It. What's it? Whatever the project of the day was. We didn't forget. It's the prior verse or verses. This is the unique case where it says that God created light. The one pasuk earlier. And then it says, had Hashem saw the light is good. That's an extra word. That's a problem in text for Rashi. And it's indicating something. And that will become the clue to what the separation was about. But the problem is not the separation. Remember, if he was worried about the separation and all the other things, there's other ways to deal with it. You could deal with it on the literal level, that he separated them in time. Light by day, darkness by night, not a problem. What he's bothered by is this extra word, the light. Why do you have to say he saw the light is good? You should just say he saw it was good. Therefore, says the Rebbe, we need, that Rashi says, we need a medrash. And the medrash is going to make sense of this, and it's going to make more sense of it on a literal level. This is an interesting twist. Even though we're employing a medrash approach, but the context here is going to make sense, at least in the wording, on a literal level, using the midrashic interpretation than the literal. Why? Because what happens is like this. The Rebbe is going to say, you know what the verse means according to Rashi? He saw the light is good, and he separated between the light and its goodness. That's precision. That's pshat. That's literal. He saw the light is good. We said that light is extra. It's not extra. The light had goodness in it. We're going to separate between the light and the goodness. That's what it means. Now, it's midrashic, because this whole idea that you're separating between light and its goodness, this is like out of the box and very creative. This doesn't sound like a literal interpretation. It sounds very midrashic, that this light contained in its special goodness. Let's assume it's godliness, it's Ruach HaKodesh, whatever it might be. And therefore, he decided that sinners can't have it. So he hid it away for the future. The righteous will have it. This is very midrashic in origin. The text itself doesn't spell out anything to do with spirituality and godliness. However, on another hand, in terms of the verbiage, it's extraordinarily literal. In terms of the verbiage, it's extraordinarily literal. Hashem saw the light is good, and he separated between the goodness and the light. It's like literal as you can get. Separation now means real separation, not separating out, and not even separating different allotments of time, but rather actual separation. Somehow we separate the goodness from the light, and that goodness he put aside for the righteous. So it's very literal. But why does he need a second interpretation? Because in context, it's not so literal. In context, it's talking about some kind of spiritual thing that was there, that was good, that we separated out. It also doesn't flow with the second half of the verse, between the night and the light and the darkness. And therefore, he employs also a literal interpretation, which in context, it makes so much more sense. What's the context? Hashem saw the light is good. He separated light and darkness. One is by day, one is by night. The context is very smooth. The wording is not so smooth. Because first of all, separation here means time allotment and not actual separation. And more importantly, it doesn't explain the extra word, the light, which is really what's bothering Rashi primarily. And therefore, that becomes the second interpretation. And this approach works very well. Again, this is the Rebbe's approach, but it's so substantiated in the language of Rashi. Again, first of all, it works very well with Rashi's header. Hashem saw the light is good. He separated. Doesn't go any further. What's bothering us is not anything to do with how you're going to separate light from darkness. What's bothering him is, what's the word light doing there? It should just say he saw it's good. Aha! He saw the light is good, he separated. We're separating the light from the good. We're taking out the good from the light and hiding it. So it works good with the header. And it also works good with the nuanced wording. This is very important. Notice in the language of Rashi, when he quotes the Midrashic interpretation, he says, he saw it's not appropriate for sinners. He didn't say he saw it's good and therefore not appropriate for sinners. He didn't need to repeat it. He just says he saw it's not appropriate for sinners. The heading says, where he quotes the pasuk, he saw the light is good. So Rashi goes right in the Midrashic interpretation. He saw it's not appropriate for sinners. He doesn't go and repeat that it's good. Whereas in the literal level, Rashi says he saw that it's good, and it can't be mixed. This is a nuance that the Rebbe notices. Like, if he wants to say he saw it's good, he should say it in both. If he doesn't say it in the first because he doesn't need to, because it's right in the verse and there's no need to repeat it, why does he feel I need to repeat it in the literal interpretation. It's perfect. Because what's really bothering Rashi is that word. Why does the text say it's good? The light is good. The word the light is extra. It should have just said he saw it's good like all the other days of creation. So on the Midrashic interpretation, we say that that is precise. The word, the extra word, the light, is to explain how he separated the goodness from the light. He saw it's not appropriate because the light is good. But in the second interpretation, the literal interpretation, he says, don't get so carried away with the fact that there's an extra word, that the light is good. It just means that it is good. It's as if Rashi is saying that extra word doesn't bother me so much. Don't make such a big deal. He saw that it's good. That's what it means. He saw the light is good. He saw that it's good. It's not such a big problem. On the literal level, we could say, all right, it's an extra word. Maybe there's a reason, but we don't have to understand it on a literal level. And on pshat level, we could just read it. He saw that it is good. It means the light. But don't get bent out of shape that it says the light. So it's good. And therefore, we want to make it separate. It's a literal level, but it's not a satisfactory literal level, which is why this is the second pshat, the second interpretation. And much more satisfactory is he saw the light is good and he separated. He saw the light is emphasized because we're separating the light from its goodness. And that becomes the first interpretation. But it's very, very strong, you see. Not only does it work well with the header of Rashi, which is true of also the Rebbe's prior interpretation, but this one works very well with the nuances in the Rashi between the first and second interpretation. And it makes sense of the whole Rashi. And what's bothering Rashi is a whole different thing from when we started. It's not about how could light and darkness be separated. It has to do with the extra word of light. Okay. Just I find it very interesting. You look at the three interpretations the Rebbe posed. The commentaries and the Rebbe's two interpretations. The first one had a problem with the separation. How could you separate light and darkness? It didn't really solve it. It said, well, we set it aside. It doesn't really mean separation. Or on the literal level, we separate at different times. In the second interpretation, we still have that same problem. In this third interpretation of the Rebbe, not only does it make sense that the Medrash is first, the meaning of separation. This is actually important. The Rabbi even indicates it in the Sicha. The word Vayavdal, separation, means literal. Whereas in the first two, according to the Midrashic interpretation, it meant setting aside. Here, Vayavdal means separated. Not between day and night, because you can't, but between goodness and light. And that's why that is what the Rabbi maintains is Rashi's intention. Okay. So then the Rebbe says, we know there's a principle that in Rashi, this Chassidus, what's called Yenish Shal Torah, the wine of Torah. It's brought down that Rashi contains in it all kind of hints and all kind of secrets. And the Rebbe says this, Rashi contains tremendous secrets. And the Rebbe starts with this. It's an interesting language that Rashi says, Af anu tzrichim l'divrei agado. We too need the words of the Medrash. When you say we too, that's an allusion to something you said earlier. Right? That's an allusion to something you said earlier. Not onu. Af bazeh onu, yeah. Even in this, also in this case, we need the Agadic interpretation. Why is it also? Because it was also, Rashi also cited the Agada in the first Rashi on the Torah. When it says Breishis bara Elokim, And Rashi says, why would the Torah begin with that? Breishis bara Elokim, in the beginning of God's creation. There's no need for that, what have you. And the Rebbe brings the Medrash, Rashi brings the Medrash, that Breishis in the beginning is really an allusion to Beis Reishis, to two firsts, two things referred to in text as first, namely the Torah and the Jewish people. The Torah is God's first, the Jewish people are God's first. They both preceded creation, which means they were part of the purpose of creation, etc. So Rashi says on the first verse in the Torah, that why does the Torah begin with Breishis? It's not understood so much on a literal level. It's understood on a midrashic level. As much as Rashi is literal, immediately on the first entry, he feels a need to give it a midrashic interpretation. That what is it? That the purpose of creation, Breishis bara Elokim, in the beginning of God's creation. What's the purpose of the whole creation? Beis Reishis, these two first. The purpose is the Jewish people and Torah. And now when Rashi comes to verse 4, Rashi says, here too we need it. So the Rebbe says that there's a linkage between this Rashi and that Rashi. And both of midrashic interpretations are connected. They have a theme that's a common denominator between them. And that's why Rashi would say, again, this is beyond its plain meaning of the Rashi, but on a deeper Hasidic wine of Torah meaning, that here too we need medrash. Just like we need it in verse 1. And as we're going to see, the medrash there and the medrash here, they're very similar in theme. How so? Whenever we say medrash, this is an important thing that the Rebbe takes the time to explain here. Medrash, it means the secrets of Torah. It's known that studying medrash, it's also an allusion, by the way, to Chassidus and Kabbalah. And it says that when you study medrash, most of the secrets of Torah are hidden in there. By extension, when we say medrash, that means the secret, the true meaning of existence. So when we learn the first Rashi, the verse says, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. It's a world. Aha. The midrashic interpretation, translation, the real true essence of the world is the purpose of the world, which is the Torah and the Jewish people. That's the midrashic of the world. It's almost like people would use the language, what's the Kabbalah of the world? What's the spirituality of the world? What's the essence? What's the neshama of the world? In Rashi language, that would be, what's the midrashic of the world? Because medrash means the hidden secrets. You want to know what's the midrashic, what's the hidden essence, what's the real truth of Breishis bara Elokim, that Hashem's creation of heaven and earth. It's not heaven and earth at all. It's the Torah and the Jewish people. That's the purpose. That's the true existence of creation. The same thing is going to be true in our Rashi. Hashem created light. Hashem created light. Now we're studying Chassidus. This is not so much about Pshat. Especially that on a Pshat level, there's a lot of discussion in the footnotes and in the commentary. What is the light that we see when we walk out on the street? Again, there's different opinions in the Talmud about it. But it seems that Rashi generally maintains that the light that we see when we walk out of the street is the sunlight of Wednesday, the fourth day of creation, as separate and apart from the light of the first day. That seems to be the way the Rebbe approaches it. Again, there are different approaches, and it's very complex in the footnotes. The light of day one is not about physical light. Again, now we're studying on a Hasidic level. What's the light? If you ever opened any Maimer Hasidus, light means the energy of the creation. Without that light, there's no world. And that was a creation of the first day. On the first day of creation, God made light. I'm taking an approach based much on footnote 51. And that is the following. That when God made light on day one, what does it mean? He created what's called in Chassidus Mimale Kalaman, the limited light which animates the world, which makes everything move. You don't see it because it's a limited light. That's what Mimale Kalaman means. It fits right into creation. It almost becomes part of creation. It's the light that animates creation. Of course, it's from Hashem, but you don't see that it is because it's hidden so well, because it's tailor-made, just like you and I have a neshama, but it's so married to our bodies, and it's just the right amount, no excess, and therefore you don't see that it's a neshama. You feel like just the body is animated, and that's what that light is. It's a creation. You might say the light of Mamale Kalama, the finite light, was created on day one, because before that, there was just the infinite light. That's referred to as Sovev Kalama, the infinite light, where everyone sees it's just Hashem, it's just Him. So God creates this light. He creates this animating power, this energy, which will create the whole world. That's the first thing He did. And then He looked at the light and He saw the goodness in it. And the Rebbe explains, I'm just going to do this briefly, but the Sicha takes it apart in detail, bringing the discourse from the Rebbe Rashab and the previous Rabbi, that he saw in that light goodness. Right? That's the Rashi commentary. What is the Chassidic of that? The light is the divine energy that animates the creation, Mamale Kalama, the limited light that animates. The goodness is the Sobev Kalama, the infinite light of Hashem. So Hashem looked at this or, this light that He invented, if you will, or created, or brought about. This light will just animate the world. And He saw in it the goodness, the infinity, the divinity. He said, we're going to have to separate that divinity. Because if creation will live off that infinite light, there will be no place for sinners. It's not worthy for sinners to have this translation. There will be no free choice. There's no way to sin. If everything in our world is animated, and instead of us seeing it through the eyes of nature and accepting that it just moves by itself because the divine light is hidden so well, as is the nature of the energy, of that limited energy of Mamale Kolam, it's so limited. But if embedded in that was the goodness, the infinite light of the truth of Hashem's existence, there'll be no room for sinners. There'll be no free choice. So Hashem separated out the goodness. He hid the infinite light. That's what happened on a Hasidic level. It mirrors perfectly the simple Rashi level. He saw goodness in the light. He took the goodness out of the light. Took something special out of the light, and he just left the light. And the Hasidic level, it's almost more explained. The light means the energy of creation. But he saw the goodness, he saw the Elokos. The infinite light of Hashem is in the energy of creation. That's got to go. Because if that's going to be sensed by creation, there won't be any room for free choice, no sinners. And that's not the purpose. So he hid that light. And that'll only be when Mashiach comes, when the whole world, when the lights go on, and everyone will see the purpose of life is Hashem and His oneness. So the question is, so what was the purpose of putting it there to begin with and then cutting it out? If Hashem did not want the infinite light, the Sovev light, to be revealed, He only wanted Mimali light, just enough energy for the world to sustain itself. So He should have just put the energy of the limited light. Why embed in it the goodness and separate it out? Why embed it into the energy of creation, the infinity of Hashem, and then say, nah, never mind, I'm going to hide it? Why play that game? The answer is just like He did in verse 1 of creation. You embed the end result in the beginning to empower us to get there. You might say, what we say in L'chadodi, Sof Maaseh b'machshava tchila, the final result is embedded in the first thought. Just like in the first Rashi. Right at the beginning of creation, Torah hints to the fact that the whole purpose of this creation is Torah and the Jewish people, even though they will not come around physically, historically, for another 2,000 years. But they're embedded right in verse 1 because that's the only way that was the purpose, that the reason to trade. That's the mission statement of creation from day one. It's not like it was a second thought. It was an afterthought. If it's an afterthought, it's too late. You can't transform the mission. You know, lahavdil, you build a company and you don't build it according to the mission statement. It's much harder later to redo it. The mission statement has to come in day one. In day one, before He started creation, Hashem right away said, this is for Torah and the Jewish people, even though they're going to come chronologically 2,000 years later. But they're the purpose right now. And therefore, you don't see them. They're there. Just a matter of time, they're going to unfold and they're going to show that the whole fabric of nature itself is all about Torah and the Jewish people. And nature itself will serve the Jewish people and Torah and allow them to fulfill their mission because embedded in nature is its purpose. Even though initially it's hidden. Why is it hidden? Because It's only there potentially. It's in purpose. It hasn't happened yet. The same thing is true in verse 4. Here too, says the Rabbi beautifully, just like in verse 1. Hashem embedded into creation the miracle of the Jewish people and Torah, even though they will not be actualized in a revealed way till many years later. But they have to be there embedded at the outset in order to empower the process. Similarly, the light, the power of the light, which is what animates everything, embedded in day one in the light is the goodness, is the infinite light, which will only be revealed when Mashiach comes. When the whole world will see that Hashem is the creator, everyone will know that he's the boss. The infinity of Hashem's truth will be obvious. However, in order for that to happen, we have to be empowered to get there, and therefore immediately, right at the outset, it was part and parcel of the light of creation, of the energy of creation. And then it was hidden out, but it's still really there. It's still really there. Because once something is part of the fabric of its essence, it can't go away. If it's part of its fabric at its outset, it's still there in some essential way, even if it's not a revealed way. And this is a perfect parallel to the fact that the Torah and the Jewish people, even though they weren't actualized in a revealed way till later, they're part of the fabric of creation and its purpose, because that's how its purpose began. Similarly, the light, although you don't see the divinity and the godliness and its purpose of creation, it was hidden on purpose, so there should be sinners and free choice. If you look close, within the fabric of the light of creation, of the energy of everything in our world, it is ultimately still divine. Because that's how it was on day one. You can't change. You know, they say when a fruit has a certain blemish in the seed, it can become a giant redwood. It's not going to change. That is there forever. Right at the seed of creation of that light, it was the infinite light. Separated out, it's all good and fine, allow free choice, but ultimately within it is embedded the goodness, the Elokosa divinity. And that is what empowers us through Torah and mitzvahs to bring the world to that place. Otherwise, you would never be able to. How could you bring godliness to a dark world from the perspective of the world? The world is the opposite of godliness. The answer is, it's not really the opposite of godliness. Because the very light and fabric of the light of the energy of creation is really a save of the whole infinity. It's just on a revealed way, it's hidden, so we have free choice. Says the Rebbe, this explains Rashi on Pasuk 5. Pasuk 5 is, Vayer vayiboker yom echad, that it was one day. And Rashi says that grammatically it's problematic, because every other day of creation it says it was a second day, and a third day, and a fourth day, and a fifth day, and a sixth day. So day one should have been, it was a first day. It doesn't say that. It says day one. One day. That's strange. That's strange. Either say one day, Yom Echad, day 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, or say first day, second day, third day, fourth day. It splits the difference. All the other days it says second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day. The first day it says day one, or one day. So Rashi says it's indicating something else, that Hashem was lonely. He was alone in the world. Yom Echad. This was the one day where everything was Echad. Just him. Says the Rebbe, how could you say that? He already created light. On day one, he created light. So what are you telling me? It's just him. However you want to translate light. Even on the Hasidic level, it means the energy of creation. That's something. That's an existence. That's going to be, a light that comes through tzimtzum and limitation, and the light that fills the world. It's something. It's already something was created. It's not just him alone. But if you understand what we said till now, you understand that really embedded within that light is the goodness. You can't really take it away, even though it's separated out. Ultimately, because it was there to begin with at its core and its root, at its essential seed, ultimately the light, the energy within creation, mirrors or reflects that true essence of the infinite light, which shouts, there's nothing but Hashem. And therefore on that day, ultimately it is just a divine light, And what does the divine light really say? The goodness of the light is just him, and therefore it's true to say that he's alone in the world. The Rebbe concludes this Sicha with a lesson in Torah study. The Rebbe says that Rashi is telling us the importance of learning Medrash, which Medrash really is an allusion to Chassidus, to the secrets of Torah. It's brought down, the person learns Medrash, they learn the secrets of Torah. And nowadays it's revealed much more so through Chassidus Chabad. Rashi wants to teach us right in the first psukim, even though you're learning Chumash and Rashi, he wants to remind you, don't forget, you got to learn Chassidus. Rashi embedded it 800 years ago so that the Rebbe can come in a time when Chassidus is so revealed and say, yeah, you got to learn Chassidus. It's not enough just to learn everything else. And Rashi alludes to it in these two Rashis, on verse 1 and on verse 4. On verse 1 he says, this verse requires a medrash. The Rebbe is reading that to mean you need medrash. You need to also study Chassidus. Why? Because the verse says in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, and you need the medrash to teach you that creation really was for God, for Torah, and for the Jewish people. This verse would be addressing the layman. Why the layman? Because the verse speaks about someone to whom the world is very real. He lives in a real world, and he has business, he has bills to pay, etc., etc. He lives with the verse, Breishis bara Elokim, at the beginning that Hashem create heaven and earth. He lives with heaven and earth. He lives with reality. He's a balabas. Says Rashi, you need the medrash. Before you get into the world, you don't want to get lost in the world. You got to learn Torah also on a Hasidic level, because otherwise the world's going to become so real to you. For its own value, you're going to lose your way. And you need to know right away, what's the Hasidus? What's the medrash of the world? You know what it is? The whole thing is for Hashem and the Jewish people and the Torah. Breishis, the two firsts. Then we come to verse 4, and the text says, and Hashem said, let there be light. This, on the level of Torah study, is an allusion to Torah scholars, because Torah is called the light of Hashem, the light. He's learning the light of Hashem. He's learning halacha, he's learning Gemara, he's learning. He's got the light. Says Rashi, we too, that's the language of the Rashi. Rashi says, for this too, we need the medrash. We is an allusion to Torah scholars like Rashi himself. We need medrash translation. Even if you learn a lot of Torah and Gemara and Halacha and Rashi and everything else, you also need Agada, you need Chassidus. But why? I'm learning the light. I'm learning Torah. No, but if you learn Torah without Chassidus, you don't have the goodness in the light. Torah itself is the light, but in the light, you don't see the goodness translation. You don't see that it's Hashem's Torah. If a person learns the nigla, the revealed parts of Torah, without Chassidus, they're missing that. When you learn Chassidus, and the Rebbe brings down from sources in Shulchan Aruch and in Bach, famous Bach on the Code of Jewish Law, that when a person learns Torah properly, before he learns Torah, he makes a blessing on the Torah, which in the Rebbe's thinking includes learning Chassidus. He understands that there's a giver to the Torah. And in the light, he sees the goodness. Because a person could learn Torah and it could be counterproductive, as it's known. When is Torah Sam Chaim, full of life? When does Torah really give you the connection to Hashem? When you also make the blessing on Torah first, which means you acknowledge and you're mindful of the giver of Torah, the godliness in Torah. And in the study of Torah itself, that means he also learns Chassidus first, maybe, and therefore he sees that in the light is goodness. And that's important. We too, even Torah scholars, need that too.